Sheriff Tom Bradley froze mid-stride, his radio crackling with impossible words. The coffee mug slipped from his weathered fingers, shattering against the station floor. A bull is digging where Jake Morrison is buried alive. Deputy Martinez stumbled backward, her face draining of color as the emergency scanner erupted with frantic voices. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows across the dispatch room as reports flooded in from Clearwater County. Ethel Patterson's trembling voice cut through the static. "Thunder knows something we don't. That bull's been digging for 3 hours straight, blood streaming from his hooves, and he won't stop." Her words carried the weight of 78 years watching animals sense what humans couldn't. "Get every rescue unit to Morrison Ranch now," Bradley barked, his military training overriding disbelief. How could a 15-year-old Brahman bull locate a man trapped 12 feet underground? And why was Jake Morrison buried beneath his own biogas chamber? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, Jake Morrison stood on the wraparound porch of his great-grandfather's ranch house, watching thunder graze in the morning mist of Clearwater County, Montana. The 15-year-old Brahman bull moved with surprising grace for his massive frame, his distinctive humped shoulders catching the golden light as he approached the fence where 8-year-old Emma waited with her daily offering of apple slices. "Daddy, why does thunder always know when I'm sad?" Emma asked, her small hand reaching through the wooden rails to stroke the bull's gentle face. The 2,000-pound giant lowered his massive head, allowing her fingers to trace the soft fur between his amber eyes. Jake's throat tightened as he watched his daughter find comfort in the creature that had been his constant companion for a decade. Since his wife Sarah's death from cancer 2 years ago, Thunder had become Emma's unofficial guardian, sensing her tears before they fell and positioning himself near the house whenever storms frightened her at night. "Animals see things we miss, sweetheart," Jake replied, though his voice carried the weight of a man drowning in circumstances beyond his control. The foreclosure notice in his back pocket felt like lead against his ribs. 72 hours. That's all the time the bank had given him to produce $1.8 million in medical debt payments, an impossible sum that represented 2 years of fighting for Sarah's life. Thunder had arrived at the ranch as an orphaned calf when Jake's father was still alive, rescued from a neighboring property after his mother died in a suspicious accident. The Morrison family had bottle-fed him, and he'd grown into something extraordinary, a bull that children could ride, that sensed danger before it materialized, and that had never shown aggression toward a human being in his 15 years of life. Ethel Patterson emerged from her small cottage across the pasture, moving with the careful dignity of her 78 years. The widow had been the Morrison family's neighbor for 4 decades, arriving each morning with fresh coffee and whatever gossip the rural Montana grapevine had produced overnight. Her silver hair was pinned back in its usual neat bun, but Jake noticed the worry lines around her sharp blue eyes had deepened recently. "Morning, Jake," she called, settling onto her usual spot on the porch swing. "Thunder's been restless lately. Pacing the fence line at night, bellowing like he's trying to tell us something important." Jake nodded, having noticed the bull's unusual behavior himself. Thunder typically slept peacefully near the barn, but for the past week he'd been patrolling the property perimeter as if guarding against an invisible threat. The behavior reminded Jake of his military service in Afghanistan, where local dogs would grow agitated hours before insurgent attacks. "Maybe he senses the change coming," Jake said quietly, not wanting Emma to overhear. The 8-year-old was already dealing with enough uncertainty about their future. What none of them realized was that Thunder's restlessness stemmed from something far more sinister than financial troubles, and that the gentle giant's protective instincts would soon be put to the ultimate test. The morning Jake's world began to crumble started like any other, with Thunder's gentle lowing drifting through the kitchen window as Emma poured cereal into her bowl. The foreclosure notice had arrived 3 days earlier, giving the Morrison family 72 hours to produce $1.8 million or lose 4 generations of family legacy. Jake sat at the scarred oak table his great-grandfather had built, staring at the legal documents that might as well have been written in a foreign language for all the hope they offered. "Daddy, why does that man in the fancy truck keep driving by our house?" Emma asked, her spoon pausing midway to her mouth. Through the window, Jake watched a silver Mercedes SUV with tinted windows make its third pass of the morning along their private road. Marcus Clayton. The name had become synonymous with dread in Clearwater County over the past 5 years. His company, Apex Agricultural Holdings, had acquired 14 family farms in the region, always swooping in just as financial crises reached their peak. Clayton's offers came with sympathetic smiles and talk of helping families transition to more sustainable lifestyles. But the prices he paid were consistently 40 cents on the dollar of actual land value. The phone rang, interrupting Jake's brooding. Clayton's voice oozed false concern through the receiver. "Jake, my friend, I hope you're considering my offer. $400,000 is more than generous for a property with your debt load. Think about Emma's future. Wouldn't a fresh start be better than bankruptcy?" "The land is worth $2.8 million, Jake replied through gritted teeth. "You know it, and I know it. Market value assumes a willing buyer, Jake. In your situation, I'm the only buyer. Sentiment doesn't pay medical bills." Clayton's tone shifted, revealing steel beneath the velvet. "I'll need an answer by tomorrow evening. After that, the offer expires and you'll face foreclosure with nothing to show for it." Jake hung up without responding, his hands shaking with suppressed rage. Outside, Thunder had moved closer to the house, his massive frame positioned between the driveway and the front porch. The bull's behavior had grown increasingly protective over the past week, as if he sensed the invisible threat circling their family. Ethel Patterson's knock came an hour later, urgent and insistent. The elderly woman's face was flushed with exertion and alarm as Jake opened the door. In her weathered hands, she clutched a manila folder stuffed with documents. "Jake, you need to see this," she gasped, pushing past him into the kitchen. "I've been going through county records and I found something disturbing about Mr. Clayton's business practices." She spread the papers across the table with the precision of someone accustomed to organizing evidence. 14 family farms in 5 years, Jake. Every single one faced sudden financial crises just before Clayton's company made offers. Equipment failures, livestock diseases, accidental property damage that insurance wouldn't cover. Jake studied the documents, his military training recognizing patterns that seemed too convenient to be coincidence. "You think he's sabotaging properties?" "I think Marcus Clayton learned a long time ago that desperate people make poor negotiators," Ethel replied grimly. "Look at the timeline on the Henderson farm. Their barn burned down 2 weeks before Clayton's offer. The Simmons family lost 30 head of cattle to a mysterious illness exactly 1 month before they sold. Every single case follows the same pattern." Emma wandered into the kitchen, drawn by the tension in the adults' voices. She carried her latest drawing, Thunder standing protectively in front of their house, his massive form rendered in careful detail with her colored pencils. "I dreamed Thunder was fighting something scary," she said quietly. "Something that wanted to hurt our family." Thunder's bellowing from the pasture interrupted the conversation, urgent and insistent. Through the window, Jake saw the bull pacing along the fence line closest to the biogas chamber, his tail switching with agitation. The chamber had been installed 6 months earlier as part of a county environmental initiative, processing organic waste into methane fuel. It was supposed to help with their financial troubles, but the monthly payments had only added to their burden. That bull's been acting strange all week, Jake muttered, watching Thunder's agitated movements. Almost like he's trying to warn us about something. Ethel gathered her documents with sudden urgency. Jake, I'm going to make some calls to old friends in law enforcement. If Clayton is running a systematic operation, there might be federal interest. But until then, don't let him pressure you into anything. And keep an eye on that bull. Animals sense things we miss. As she left, Thunder's bellowing intensified, echoing across the Montana countryside like a primal warning. The massive Brahmin positioned himself directly between the house and the biogas chamber, his amber eyes fixed on something only he could perceive. Emma pressed her face against the window, her small hand flat against the glass. "Thunder's trying to tell us something important, Daddy. He's scared, but he's trying to be brave for us." The next morning arrived with an unseasonable chill that made Thunder's breath visible in the pre-dawn darkness. Jake woke to the sound of the bull's agitated bellowing, a sound unlike anything he'd heard in their 10 years together. Through his bedroom window, he could see Thunder pacing frantically along the fence line, his massive head swinging back and forth as if tracking an invisible threat. Emma appeared in his doorway, clutching her worn, stuffed horse. "Daddy, Thunder's been making that scary noise all night. He woke me up 3 times. Jake pulled on his boots and jacket, his unease growing with each of Thunder's distressed calls. Outside, the bull immediately approached the fence when he spotted Jake, pressing his enormous head against the wooden rails and making low, urgent sounds deep in his throat. His amber eyes held an intelligence that sometimes unnerved Jake, as if the bull understood far more about their situation than any animal should. "What is it, boy?" Jake murmured, reaching through the rails to stroke Thunder's neck. The bull's hide was damp with nervous sweat, and his muscles trembled with tension. Thunder turned his massive head toward the biogas chamber, then back to Jake, repeating the motion insistently. The biogas chamber sat 200 yards from the main house, a concrete structure partially buried in the hillside. It had been installed by Clayton's recommended contractor 6 months earlier, supposedly to help the Morrison family generate additional income from organic waste processing. The monthly payments on the equipment, however, had only added to their financial burden rather than relieving it. Jake's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Equipment malfunction detected in biogas chamber. Immediate inspection required for safety certification. Failure to inspect within 4 hours will void insurance coverage." Thunder's agitation intensified as Jake approached the chamber, the bull following along the fence line and calling out with increasing desperation. When Jake reached the heavy metal door leading to the underground portion of the chamber, Thunder's bellowing became almost frantic. The bull threw his massive weight against the fence, trying to reach Jake, his eyes wide with what could only be described as terror. "Easy, Thunder," Jake called back. But the bull's distress was affecting him too. His hands shook slightly as he entered the access code, a combination that had mysteriously changed overnight, though the text message had provided the new numbers. The chamber door swung open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing concrete steps leading down into darkness. The underground portion of the biogas chamber was larger than it appeared from the surface, with pipes and monitoring equipment lining the walls. Jake's military training kicked in as he descended, his senses alert for any signs of danger. The air smelled wrong, not the usual earthy odor of decomposing organic matter, but something sharper, more chemical. Above ground, Thunder had worked himself into a frenzy. Ethel Patterson emerged from her cottage, drawn by the bull's desperate cries. She found Emma standing at the kitchen window, tears streaming down her face as she watched Thunder trying to break through the fence. "Thunder's trying to warn Daddy," Emma sobbed. "But Daddy won't listen. Animals know things, just like you said." Ethel's blood ran cold as she watched Thunder's behavior. In her 78 years, she'd seen animals react this way only a handful of times, always when sensing imminent danger to someone they loved. Her hand moved instinctively to her phone, but before she could dial, a tremendous rumbling sound shook the ground beneath their feet. The biogas chamber's concrete ceiling, weakened by carefully placed charges disguised as routine maintenance work, gave way with a thunderous crash. 200 cubic yards of earth, concrete and twisted metal collapsed into the underground space, sealing Jake 12 feet below the surface with no way out. Thunder's reaction was immediate and devastating. The massive bull threw himself against the fence with such force that the wooden posts splintered and cracked. When the barrier finally gave way, he charged toward the collapsed chamber site, his hooves tearing up great chunks of earth as he ran. Without hesitation, he began digging at the pile of debris, his powerful legs and massive weight allowing him to move earth that would challenge construction equipment. Emma's screams brought neighbors running from across the valley. Sheriff Tom Bradley arrived within minutes, his radio crackling with emergency calls as word spread through the tight-knit community. But it was Thunder who dominated the scene, a 2,000-pound force of nature clawing desperately at the collapsed earth, blood streaming from his hooves as he refused to stop digging. "That bull knows exactly where to dig," Deputy Martinez observed in amazement. "He's not searching randomly, he's got a specific target." Thunder's bellowing had changed from distress to determination, a deep, rhythmic sound that seemed to carry across the entire county. With each powerful stroke of his hooves, he moved tons of earth and debris, his amber eyes fixed on a point deep beneath the surface that only he seemed to understand. Marcus Clayton arrived in his silver Mercedes, his face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Terrible accident," he said to Sheriff Bradley. "These old chambers can be unstable. I hope Jake had adequate life insurance for Emma's sake." But Thunder paid no attention to the gathering crowd. His world had narrowed to a single purpose, reaching the man who had bottle-fed him as a calf, who had trusted him with the protection of the most precious thing in both their lives. Emma? The bull's massive frame trembled with exhaustion, but his digging never slowed. Blood mixed with earth beneath his hooves, and his breathing came in great, labored gasps. Deep underground, Jake Morrison lay trapped in a pocket of air that grew smaller with each passing minute. Above him, he could hear the rhythmic sound of Thunder's digging, and despite his desperate situation, he felt a surge of hope. His guardian was coming for him, just as he had come for Thunder all those years ago. 12 feet underground, Jake Morrison fought to remain conscious as his air supply dwindled with each labored breath. The collapse had created a small pocket of space around him, but the crushing weight of concrete and earth pressed in from all sides. His left leg was pinned beneath a massive chunk of the chamber's ceiling, and he could feel warm blood seeping through his jeans. Above him, the rhythmic sound of Thunder's desperate digging provided the only hope in his suffocating darkness. The bull had been working for over an hour now, his massive hooves moving earth with mechanical precision. Each stroke brought him closer to Jake, but also opened fresh wounds on his already bleeding feet. Thunder's bellowing had evolved into something more purposeful, a deep, resonant call that seemed to penetrate the earth itself, as if he were trying to maintain contact with the man trapped below. On the surface, the scene had transformed into controlled chaos. Emergency responders from 3 counties converged on the Morrison Ranch, their vehicles creating a maze of flashing lights across the pasture. Fire Chief Robert Hayes studied the collapse site with growing frustration, his 40 years of rescue experience offering no easy solutions. "We need heavy equipment," he announced to the gathered crowd. "Excavators, maybe a crane. This much debris, it could take 6 hours to clear safely." 6 hours? Dr. Sarah Wheeler, the county's only emergency physician, shook her head grimly. "In that confined space, he has maybe 3 hours of air left, probably less." Emma Morrison stood transfixed beside Ethel Patterson, her small frame trembling as she watched Thunder's relentless work. The 8-year-old girl had refused all attempts to take her away from the scene, her child's intuition somehow understanding that Thunder needed her presence. Her latest drawing lay forgotten in the dirt beside her, a crude but accurate depiction of Thunder digging toward a stick figure labeled Daddy. "Why won't they let the diggers help Thunder?" Emma asked Ethel, her voice thick with tears. Ethel knelt beside the child, her own eyes fixed on the bull's methodical excavation. "Sometimes, sweetheart, machines can't do what love can do. Thunder knows exactly where your daddy is, better than any machine ever could." The rescue team's attempts to approach Thunder's dig site had been met with fierce resistance. The normally gentle bull would not allow anyone near his work area, positioning his massive body between the rescuers and the hole he was creating. When Fire Chief Hayes tried to bring in a small excavator, Thunder had charged the machine with such fury that the operator had fled, leaving the equipment abandoned 20 yards away. Marcus Clayton circulated among the emergency responders, his voice a constant murmur of concern and helpful suggestions. To casual observers, he appeared genuinely distressed by the accident, offering resources from his company and expressing deep sympathy for the Morrison family's plight. But Ethel Patterson watched him with the sharp eyes of someone who had spent 30 years analyzing criminal behavior for the FBI. "Terrible thing," Clayton said to Sheriff Bradley, shaking his head sadly. "These old biogas chambers. The inspector warned me about potential structural issues. I tried to convince Jake to upgrade the safety systems, but with his financial situation..." He let the implication hang in the air. Sheriff Bradley nodded absently, but something about Clayton's manner struck him as off. The man seemed too prepared, too quick with explanations for what should have been a shocking accident. "When did this inspection happen?" he asked. "Last week," Clayton replied smoothly. "I have the documentation in my vehicle if you need it for your report." Meanwhile, Thunder's excavation had reached a depth of 8 feet. His breathing came in great, labored gasps, and blood now streamed steadily from his torn hooves, staining the earth around him red. Dr. Wheeler had tried twice to treat his injuries, but the bull refused to stop working long enough for her to apply bandages. "That animal is going to kill himself," she said to Ethel. "He's lost a lot of blood, and at his age this kind of exertion..." "He knows," Ethel replied quietly. "Thunder knows the cost, but he's willing to pay it." Deep underground, Jake's consciousness drifted in and out like ocean waves. The sound of Thunder's digging kept him anchored to reality, a rhythmic reminder that he wasn't alone in the suffocating darkness. In his delirium, he began to hear his wife Sarah's voice, soft and comforting as it had been during her final days in the hospital. "Hold on, Jake," the phantom voice whispered. "Emma needs you. Thunder needs you to fight." With tremendous effort, Jake managed to move his free hand to his pocket where his phone had somehow survived the collapse. The screen was cracked, but it still functioned. No signal, of course. 12 feet of earth and concrete made communication impossible. But the phone's LED flashlight still worked, and Jake used it to examine his prison more carefully. The air pocket was roughly the size of a small closet, created by chance when a large piece of the chamber's roof had fallen at an angle, creating a triangular space. But the walls were gradually shifting as the weight above settled, making the space smaller with each passing minute. Jake estimated he had perhaps 90 minutes of breathable air remaining. Above ground, the arrival of professional rescue equipment created a new crisis. The State Emergency Response Team brought sophisticated listening devices and drilling equipment capable of reaching Jake within hours, but their protocols demanded that all civilian interference be cleared from the work site, including Thunder. "Sir, we need that animal removed immediately," Captain Jennifer Ross informed Sheriff Bradley. "Our equipment operators can't work safely with a hostile bull in the area." Sheriff Bradley looked at Thunder, who had now dug down nearly 10 feet and showed no signs of slowing despite his obvious exhaustion. The bull's entire body was covered in sweat and dirt, his white coat stained red with blood from his injuries. But his eyes remained focused and determined, as if he could see through the earth to the man below. "That bull has been digging for 2 hours straight," Bradley said. "He's located Jake better than any of your instruments have managed. Maybe we should let him finish the job." Captain Ross's expression hardened. "Sheriff, with all due respect, we're trained professionals. We have procedures that save lives. A bleeding, exhausted animal doesn't belong in a rescue operation." The debate was interrupted by a new sound from Thunder's excavation, the dull thud of hooves striking metal instead of earth. The bull's excitement was immediate and obvious. His bellowing intensified, taking on a triumphant note that made everyone on the scene turn toward the hole. "He's found something," Emma said, her voice filled with sudden hope. She broke away from Ethel's protective grip and ran toward Thunder's dig site before anyone could stop her. "Emma, no!" several voices called out. But the 8-year-old girl was already sliding down into the hole beside the massive bull. Thunder immediately gentled his movements, careful not to harm the child as she joined him in the excavation. Together, they worked to clear the last few feet of debris, Thunder using his powerful hooves, Emma using her small hands to move stones and dirt that Thunder couldn't reach. "There!" Emma suddenly shouted. "I can see metal! Thunder found the chamber door!" The discovery galvanized the rescue team. Captain Ross quickly repositioned her equipment operators, working around Thunder's excavation rather than trying to replace it. The bull, seeming to understand that help had arrived, finally allowed the emergency responders to approach his dig site. Dr. Wheeler immediately slid into the hole to tend to Thunder's injuries while the rescue team worked to clear the final obstacles. The bull's hooves were badly damaged, with deep cuts exposing bone in several places. His breathing was labored, and she could see the signs of extreme exhaustion in his eyes. "You magnificent animal," she whispered as she wrapped his hooves in emergency bandages. "You've done the impossible." The chamber door was finally exposed after another 30 minutes of careful excavation. When the rescue team managed to force it open, Jake Morrison's weak voice echoed up from the darkness below. "Thunder," he called out, "is that you, boy?" The bull's response was a gentle, exhausted lowing that carried all the love and loyalty of their 10-year partnership. Thunder had found his friend, brought help, and completed the impossible rescue. But the cost of his heroic effort was written in every labored breath and every drop of blood that stained the Montana earth around them. As paramedics descended into the chamber to extract Jake, Thunder finally allowed himself to collapse at the edge of the excavation, his massive frame trembling with exhaustion. Emma immediately went to him, wrapping her small arms around his enormous neck. "You saved Daddy," she whispered into his ear. "You're the best bull in the whole world." But even as Jake was carefully lifted from his underground prison, Ethel Patterson was studying Marcus Clayton's reaction to the successful rescue. The man's face showed disappointment rather than relief, and he was already reaching for his phone with the urgent movements of someone whose carefully laid plans had just fallen apart. The moment Jake Morrison was lifted from the collapsed biogas chamber, strapped to a backboard and breathing through an oxygen mask, Thunder struggled to his feet despite his devastating injuries. The massive Brahman bull swayed dangerously, his bandaged hooves barely supporting his 2,000-pound frame, but his amber eyes remained fixed on the paramedics loading his human into the ambulance. Dr. Sarah Wheeler knelt beside Thunder, her veterinary training conflicting with her role as the county's emergency physician. "Easy, big guy," she murmured, checking his pulse through the thick hide of his neck. What she found alarmed her. Thunder's heart rate was dangerously elevated, and his breathing remained labored despite the successful rescue. The bull had pushed his 15-year-old body far beyond its limits. "Is Daddy going to be okay?" Emma asked, her small hand still resting on Thunder's massive shoulder. The 8-year-old had refused to leave the bull's side throughout the rescue operation, somehow understanding that Thunder needed her presence as much as she needed his. "Your daddy's alive because of Thunder," Dr. Wheeler replied, her voice thick with emotion. "This bull just performed a miracle." But even as the ambulance prepared to transport Jake to the trauma center in Billings, the real drama was just beginning. Ethel Patterson had been watching Marcus Clayton throughout the rescue operation, her trained FBI instincts analyzing every micro-expression and nervous gesture. When Clayton stepped away from the crowd to make a hushed phone call, she followed at a distance. "The operation failed," she heard him say into his phone. "Morrison's alive and that damn bull found him. We need to activate the contingency plan immediately." Ethel's blood ran cold. For 20 years she had suspected that the mysterious accidents plaguing Clearwater County's family farms were connected, but she had never had proof. Now, listening to Clayton's conversation, she realized that Jake's accident was actually attempted murder, part of a systematic campaign to acquire valuable ranch land through intimidation and elimination. Sheriff Tom Bradley was coordinating the scene when Ethel approached him with urgent whispers. "Tom, you need to arrest Marcus Clayton immediately. I just heard him admit that Jake's accident was deliberate." Bradley's weathered face hardened. He had known Ethel Patterson for 40 years, first as the town librarian, then as a sharp-minded widow who seemed to know everyone's business. What most people didn't know was that Ethel had spent 30 years as an FBI forensic accountant before retiring to Clearwater County. If she said Clayton was guilty, Bradley trusted her judgment completely. "What kind of evidence do we have?" Bradley asked quietly. "Circumstantial for now, but compelling," Ethel replied. 14 family farms in 5 years, all facing mysterious accidents right before Clayton's company made offers. I've been tracking the pattern, and Jake was supposed to be victim number 15. Meanwhile, Thunder's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The massive bull had expended every ounce of his strength in the desperate rescue effort, and his aged body was shutting down from the trauma. Dr. Wheeler made the difficult decision to sedate him for transport to her veterinary clinic, but Thunder fought the tranquilizer with the same determination he had shown in digging for Jake. "He wants to stay with Emma," the veterinarian observed. "Even drugged, he's fighting to protect her." Emma seemed to understand Thunder's distress. She pressed her face against his massive head, whispering words of comfort. "It's okay, Thunder. Daddy's safe now." "You can rest." Only then did the bull allow the sedative to take effect, his enormous body finally relaxing as Emma's voice soothed his fears. As Thunder was loaded onto a specialized trailer for transport to the veterinary clinic, Marcus Clayton made his move. The collapse of his carefully planned operation had left him exposed and desperate. If Jake Morrison survived to testify about the suspicious circumstances surrounding the biogas chamber's installation, federal investigators would inevitably uncover the entire conspiracy. Clayton approached Sheriff Bradley with practiced concern. "Sheriff, I've been thinking about this accident and I believe we may have a problem. The biogas chamber was installed by a contractor I recommended, Pinnacle Environmental Solutions. If their work caused this collapse, my company could face significant liability." It was a masterful performance, positioning himself as a potential victim rather than a perpetrator. But Ethel Patterson had spent 3 decades recognizing such manipulations. She stepped forward with the confidence of someone accustomed to exposing financial crimes. "How interesting that you mentioned Pinnacle Environmental," she said, her voice carrying the authority of her former profession. "Because according to Montana state records, Pinnacle Environmental Solutions is a subsidiary of Apex Agricultural Holdings. Your company, Mr. Clayton." The color drained from Clayton's face as he realized his mistake. In his desperation to deflect blame, he had inadvertently revealed the connection between his company and the contractor who had sabotaged the biogas chamber. "That's impossible," Clayton stammered. "I would never—" "Tom, arrest this man," Ethel interrupted. "I have 20 years of financial records that prove systematic fraud, and I'm willing to bet that when FBI forensic accountants examine those books, they'll find evidence of much worse than financial manipulation." Sheriff Bradley's hand moved to his service weapon, but Clayton was already backing toward his Mercedes SUV. "You can't prove anything," he snarled, his careful facade finally cracking. 14 families thought they were smarter than me, too. They all learned otherwise. The admission hung in the air like a thunderclap. In his rage and desperation, Marcus Clayton had just confessed to crimes spanning 2 decades. Several witnesses, including Deputy Martinez and Fire Chief Hayes, had heard every word. Clayton reached his vehicle and gunned the engine, sending gravel flying as he attempted to escape, but his path was blocked by the arrival of the helicopter that would transport Jake to the trauma center. The aircraft had landed in the ranch's main driveway, effectively trapping Clayton's Mercedes in the compound. The standoff lasted only minutes. Surrounded by law enforcement officers and community members who had just learned the truth about their neighbors' deaths, Clayton finally surrendered. As Sheriff Bradley placed him under arrest, the man who had terrorized Clearwater County for 2 decades broke down completely. "You don't understand," Clayton sobbed. "I was trying to save agriculture. These small farms are inefficient, unsustainable. My father lost everything because he couldn't compete. I swore I would modernize this industry, make it profitable." "By murdering innocent families?" Emma Morrison's young voice cut through Clayton's self-justification like a knife. The 8-year-old had been listening from beside Thunder's trailer, her child's moral clarity exposing the hollow core of Clayton's excuses. As Clayton was loaded into a patrol car, Jake Morrison was being airlifted to Billings for emergency surgery. His injuries were serious but not life-threatening: a broken leg, several cracked ribs, and severe dehydration. He would recover completely thanks to Thunder's heroic intervention, but Thunder himself was fighting a different battle. At Dr. Wheeler's clinic, the bull's vital signs continued to deteriorate despite aggressive treatment. The massive heart that had powered his desperate rescue effort was now struggling to keep his aging body alive. X-rays revealed internal injuries that would challenge even a young, healthy animal. "Will Thunder be okay?" Emma asked as she sat beside the bull's stall, her small hand resting on his massive head. Dr. Wheeler chose her words carefully. "Thunder gave everything he had to save your daddy, sweetheart. Sometimes when we love someone that much, we're willing to pay any price to keep them safe." Emma nodded with the solemn understanding that children sometimes possess about life's deepest truths. "Thunder's a hero, isn't he?" "The greatest hero I've ever known," Dr. Wheeler confirmed, her professional composure cracking as she watched the child comfort the dying bull. Outside the clinic, word of Thunder's heroic rescue was spreading throughout Montana and beyond. News crews were already arriving in Clearwater County, drawn by the story of a bull who had accomplished what sophisticated rescue equipment could not. But for Emma Morrison, Thunder wasn't a news story or a symbol. He was family, and family never gave up on each other. 3 days after the rescue, Thunder lay in the largest stall at Dr. Wheeler's veterinary clinic, his massive frame a shadow of its former strength. The heroic bull who had moved mountains of earth to save Jake Morrison was now struggling to lift his enormous head. Internal bleeding had been stopped through emergency surgery, but the damage to his 15-year-old heart was irreversible. Each labored breath echoed through the clinic like a countdown timer marking the end of an era. Emma Morrison had not left Thunder's side since her father's helicopter departure to Billings. The 8-year-old girl slept curled against the bull's warm flank, her small body rising and falling with his increasingly shallow breathing. Ethel Patterson brought meals that Emma barely touched, her attention focused entirely on comforting the animal who had saved her family. "Thunder's tired," Emma whispered to Dr. Wheeler during one of the veterinarian's hourly checks. "He keeps looking at the door like he's waiting for someone." Dr. Wheeler's experienced hands moved gently over Thunder's massive frame, checking vital signs that grew weaker with each passing hour. The bull's amber eyes still held their intelligent spark, but she could see the peaceful resignation of an animal who had completed his life's mission. Thunder was ready to let go, but something was holding him to this world. The call came at 4:17 a.m. on the fourth day. Jake Morrison, despite doctor's orders to remain hospitalized for observation, had discharged himself and was driving back to Clearwater County. His broken leg was immobilized in a cast, his ribs were wrapped tightly to prevent further injury, but nothing could keep him from Thunder's side. "That stubborn fool is going to hurt himself worse," Dr. Wheeler muttered as she hung up the phone. But she understood Jake's desperation. The bond between man and bull transcended normal relationships. Thunder had literally given his life to save Jake, and Jake would not let his friend die alone. News of Thunder's condition had spread beyond Montana's borders. The story of the bull who defied nature to rescue his human had captured hearts across America. Flowers and letters arrived by the hundreds, addressed simply to Thunder, Hero Bull, Clearwater County, Montana. Children from dozens of states sent drawings and get-well cards, their innocent artwork covering the clinic walls with rainbows and hearts. But the attention felt hollow to those who knew Thunder personally. This wasn't about celebrity or viral fame. It was about the imminent loss of a family member, a guardian, a friend whose loyalty had never wavered in 15 years of life. Marcus Clayton's arrest had unleashed a flood of confessions and evidence. Federal investigators discovered that his systematic elimination of family farms had claimed 17 lives over 2 decades, not 14 as originally believed. Families who had grieved accidental deaths of loved ones finally learned the truth. Their fathers, mothers, and children had been murdered for land acquisitions. The weight of these revelations crushed the spirits of survivors who had spent years blaming themselves for not preventing tragedies that were actually calculated murders. Margaret Henderson, whose husband died in a barn fire 3 years earlier, sobbed uncontrollably when investigators confirmed that the blaze had been deliberately set. "All this time, I thought Tom was careless with his smoking," she said through tears. "I blamed him for leaving Emma without a father. But someone murdered him for our farm." Jake arrived at the clinic as dawn painted the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. His appearance shocked everyone, pale, walking with crutches, moving with obvious pain despite his determination. But when Thunder heard Jake's voice calling his name, the bull's ears pricked forward for the first time in days. "Hey there, big guy," Jake said softly, lowering himself carefully beside Thunder's massive head. "I hear you've been causing quite a stir around here." Thunder's response was barely audible, a gentle rumbling deep in his chest that seemed to express both joy and sorrow. The bull's amber eyes focused on Jake's face with the same intelligence and love that had characterized their 10-year partnership. Emma immediately positioned herself between Jake and Thunder, creating a family circle that felt sacred in its intimacy. For the first time since the rescue, she allowed herself to cry, deep, wrenching sobs that released days of accumulated fear and grief. "Thunder's dying because he saved you, Daddy," she said between gasps. "He used up all his strength getting you out of that hole." Jake's throat constricted as he looked at his daughter's tear-stained face, then at Thunder's peaceful expression. The bull, who had been his constant companion, Emma's protector, and the ranch's gentle giant was preparing to leave them. The magnitude of Thunder's sacrifice, not just the physical effort of the rescue, but the deliberate choice to trade his life for Jake's, overwhelmed him. "Thunder, you magnificent animal," Jake whispered, his hand stroking the bull's neck. "You didn't just save my life. You saved our family, our home, our future. I don't know how to say goodbye to someone who gave me everything." Dr. Wheeler approached with the quiet dignity of someone who had overseen countless animal deaths. Her professional experience told her that Thunder had perhaps hours remaining, but her personal attachment to this extraordinary bull made every minute precious. "There's something you should know," she said to Jake and Emma. "Thunder's been fighting to stay alive since the rescue. His injuries should have killed him 2 days ago, but he's been holding on. I think he was waiting for you." The truth of her words became evident as Thunder visibly relaxed in Jake's presence. The bull's breathing, while still labored, seemed more peaceful. His massive body, which had been tensed with effort for days, finally allowed itself to rest completely. Outside the clinic, the community of Clearwater County maintained a quiet vigil. Neighbors who had known Thunder since his arrival as an orphaned calf brought flowers, fresh hay, and their own children to pay respects. The parking lot filled with pickup trucks and cars as word spread that Thunder's time was approaching. Sheriff Tom Bradley stopped by with updates on the investigation. Clayton's conspiracy had unraveled completely under federal scrutiny, revealing a network of corruption that extended to local officials, insurance companies, and construction contractors. Justice would finally come for the 17 families who had lost loved ones to his greed. "That bull didn't just save your life, Jake," Bradley said quietly. "His rescue exposed Clayton's entire operation. If you had died in that chamber, Clayton would have gotten away with decades of murder." As afternoon faded toward evening, Thunder's condition continued to decline. His breathing became increasingly shallow, and his heart rate dropped to dangerously low levels. Dr. Wheeler prepared Jake and Emma for the inevitable, explaining that Thunder's body was simply too damaged to continue fighting. "Animals know when it's time," she said gently. "Thunder accomplished what he needed to do. He saved you, Jake, and he made sure Emma would never lose her father. Now he's ready to rest." Emma climbed carefully onto Thunder's side, positioning herself where she could whisper directly into his ear. Her 8-year-old voice carried the wisdom of someone who understood love's deepest truths. "Thank you for saving my daddy," she said softly. "Thank you for protecting our family. You're the best bull who ever lived, and I'll never forget you." Thunder's tail moved slightly. Not quite a wag, but an acknowledgement of her words. His amber eyes, now clouded with approaching death, remained fixed on the faces of the humans he had devoted his life to protecting. Jake leaned closer, his own voice breaking with emotion. "You can go now, Thunder. You've done everything anyone could ask. Emma and I will be okay because of you. Rest now, my friend. You've earned your peace." As if waiting for those exact words, Thunder's breathing finally began to slow. The massive bull who had defied nature itself to save his human family was preparing to join the generations of animals who had loved without condition and sacrificed without regret. The sun was setting over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples when Thunder drew his final breath. He died as he had lived, surrounded by love, having given everything for those he cared about most. The silence that followed Thunder's last breath felt profound and sacred, as if the entire world had paused to honor the passing of something extraordinary. Emma's small hand remained on the bull's massive neck, her tears falling silently onto his still warm hide. Jake sat in stunned disbelief, struggling to comprehend that the gentle giant who had saved his life was gone forever. Dr. Wheeler stepped forward to officially confirm what everyone already knew, her veterinary training providing the clinical framework for what felt like a deeply personal loss. Thunder's heart had simply stopped, worn out by 15 years of life and 3 days of superhuman effort that had defied every biological limitation. "He died peacefully," she said softly, her professional composure barely containing her own grief. "Animals this special. They choose their moment." Thunder waited until he knew you were both safe. Outside the clinic, word of Thunder's death spread through Clearwater County like ripples across still water. Neighbors who had known the bull since his arrival as an orphaned calf began arriving to pay their respects. Within an hour, the parking lot was filled with pickup trucks, cars, and families carrying flowers, candles, and handmade tributes. But even as the community mourned Thunder's passing, Ethel Patterson was making a discovery that would forever change how they remembered the heroic bull. While organizing the mountain of mail that had arrived for Thunder, she found something extraordinary hidden among the sympathy cards and children's drawings. A manila envelope, unmarked and sealed, had been slipped into the pile sometime during the night. Inside, Ethel discovered documents that made her former FBI training kick into high gear: financial records, property deeds, and most shocking of all, a confession letter written in Marcus Clayton's handwriting. "Jake, you need to see this immediately," Ethel said, her voice tight with urgency. The confession revealed the true scope of Clayton's crimes, but more importantly, it exposed the reason behind Thunder's extraordinary behavior during the rescue. Clayton had not just sabotaged the biogas chamber, he had been systematically poisoning livestock across the county for 2 decades, using a slow-acting toxin that mimicked natural disease. Thunder's mother had been Clayton's first victim 20 years earlier. The orphaned calf, who eventually became the Morrison family's guardian, had witnessed his mother's murder as a days-old baby. Clayton's confession revealed that he had always planned to eliminate Thunder as well, recognizing that the bull's unusual intelligence made him a potential threat to future operations. "Thunder knew," Emma said with the clarity that children sometimes possess about complex truths. "He always knew who the bad man was. That's why he tried to warn us." The confession also revealed Clayton's most chilling secret. Jake's accident was meant to be the final step in acquiring not just the Morrison Ranch, but the entire valley. With Jake dead and Emma orphaned, Clayton's company would have gained control of the richest agricultural land in 3 counties. Sheriff Bradley read the confession with growing amazement. According to this, Clayton has been planning Jake's murder for 5 years. The biogas chamber, the financial pressure, even the timing of the collapse, everything was calculated to look like an accident. But Thunder's heroic intervention had destroyed 20 years of careful planning. The bull's desperate digging had not only saved Jake's life, it had exposed the entire conspiracy and brought justice to 17 families who had lost loved ones to Clayton's greed. As investigators processed this new evidence, the community's grief over Thunder's death began transforming into something deeper, a recognition that they had witnessed something truly miraculous. The bull, who had seemed to possess almost supernatural awareness, had actually been protecting his family from a threat that only he understood. Dr. Wheeler made another discovery while preparing Thunder's body for burial. Hidden beneath the bull's thick hide, she found old scars that formed unusual patterns, marks consistent with attempts to inject foreign substances. Someone had been trying to poison Thunder for years, but the bull's massive size and strong constitution had protected him. "Clayton wasn't just planning to kill Jake," she explained to the gathered family. "He's been trying to eliminate Thunder for decades. This bull survived multiple assassination attempts." The revelation reframed everything about Thunder's protective behavior. His refusal to graze in certain areas, his agitation around strangers, his seemingly paranoid vigilance, all of it had been justified. Thunder had been fighting for his life and his family's safety every single day. Emma's response to this news surprised everyone. Instead of increased grief, she showed a fierce pride that reminded Jake of her late mother's strength. "Thunder won," she said simply. "The bad man tried to hurt us for 20 years, but Thunder won." As word of Clayton's confession spread, families across the county began sharing their own stories of Thunder's interventions. Margaret Henderson remembered how Thunder had refused to let her husband enter their barn the day before it burned. The Simmons family recalled Thunder breaking through fences to warn them about their cattle's water supply, water that investigators now knew had been contaminated with Clayton's poison. "That bull was trying to save everyone," Margaret said through tears. "We thought he was just being aggressive, but he was trying to warn us about the danger." The pattern became clear. For 20 years, Thunder had been fighting a solitary war against Clayton's systematic murders. His protective instincts had extended beyond the Morrison family to include the entire community, making him a guardian angel for people who never realized they needed protection. Jake struggled to process the magnitude of Thunder's sacrifice. Not only had the bull saved his life through the heroic rescue, but he had been protecting the family from a hidden threat for 2 decades. Thunder's death represented the end of a 20-year mission that few humans could have sustained. "He knew he was dying," Jake said to Ethel as they sat beside Thunder's still form. "When he dug me out of that chamber, he knew it would kill him. But he also knew that Clayton would never stop until our family was destroyed." Ethel nodded, her experienced eyes seeing patterns that others missed. "Thunder made a choice, Jake. He traded his life for your family's future and for justice for 17 other families. That bull understood something about heroism that most humans never learn." As night fell over Clearwater County, the vigil at Dr. Wheeler's clinic took on an almost sacred quality. Candles flickered in the darkness, children's drawings fluttered in the evening breeze, and families shared stories about the bull who had protected them all without ever seeking recognition or reward. Emma fell asleep beside Thunder's body, her small hand still resting on his neck. In her dreams, she saw Thunder young and strong again, running through endless pastures where no evil could touch him. When she woke, she would begin planning the memorial that would ensure Thunder's heroism was never forgotten. But first, the community needed to understand the full truth about their gentle giant's extraordinary life, and prepare for the final revelation that would transform grief into something approaching reverence. 6 months after Thunder's heroic death, the Morrison Ranch had transformed into something neither Jake nor Emma could have imagined. The foreclosure notice that had once threatened to destroy their family legacy now seemed like a distant nightmare, replaced by an outpouring of support that had restored their faith in human goodness. The Thunder Memorial Foundation, established with donations from across America, had not only saved the ranch, but turned it into a symbol of hope for struggling family farms everywhere. Jake stood on the wraparound porch where he had once contemplated losing everything, watching Emma lead a group of visiting children toward Thunder's memorial in the East Pasture. The bronze statue captured the bull in his moment of greatest triumph, head lowered, powerful legs braced for digging, amber eyes focused with determination. The inscription at its base read simply, "Thunder, Guardian, Hero, Friend." He gave everything for love. The memorial had become a pilgrimage site for families dealing with their own struggles. Parents brought children to hear Thunder's story and learn about courage in the face of impossible odds. Agricultural communities from across the country sent delegations to understand how the Morrison Ranch had survived corporate predation. Emma, now 9 years old, had become an unlikely spokesperson for the power of believing in those who love us unconditionally. "Thunder taught me that love doesn't count the cost," Emma told a group of children gathered around the statue. "When someone you love is in danger, you don't think about what it might cost you. you just act. The legal aftermath of Clayton's confession had brought justice that many families thought they would never see. Federal prosecutors had dismantled his entire network, recovering over $47 million in fraudulently acquired assets. Every family that had lost property to Clayton's schemes received full compensation, along with additional damages for the pain and suffering caused by his systematic murders. Marcus Clayton himself sat in a federal prison, serving 17 consecutive life sentences for murder. His confession had provided prosecutors with enough evidence to convict dozens of accomplices, from corrupt insurance officials to the contractors who had carried out his sabotage operations. The man who had terrorized Clearwater County for 2 decades would never see freedom again. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the passage of federal legislation known as Thunder's Law, which provided enhanced protections for family farms facing financial distress. The law created federal oversight of agricultural land acquisitions, preventing the kind of predatory practices that Clayton had used to build his empire. Jake had testified before Congress about Thunder's heroism, bringing many lawmakers to tears with his account of the bull's sacrifice. Dr. Sarah Wheeler had become something more than just the county's veterinarian. She had become Jake's partner in life, as well as in preserving Thunder's legacy. Their wedding 6 months earlier had been held in Thunder's pasture, with Emma serving as maid of honor and hundreds of community members celebrating the union. Sarah's own background in large animal psychology had brought scientific credibility to the stories about Thunder's extraordinary intelligence and protective instincts. What Thunder accomplished wasn't supernatural, Sarah explained to visiting researchers. It was the result of deep emotional bonds, exceptional intelligence, and circumstances that demanded heroic action. Animals are capable of far more than we typically recognize, especially when motivated by love for their human families. The research conducted at the Thunder Memorial Ranch had begun attracting international attention from animal behaviorists and agricultural scientists. Thunder's story had opened new conversations about the emotional intelligence of livestock and the potential for deeper partnerships between humans and farm animals. Several universities had established scholarship programs in Thunder's name, funding research into animal cognition and human-animal bonds. Emma's role in preserving Thunder's memory had evolved beyond simple storytelling. She had written and illustrated a children's book about Thunder's life, with all proceeds going to the Memorial Foundation. Her artwork, once dismissed as childish imagination, was now recognized as surprisingly accurate documentation of Thunder's behavior patterns and protective instincts. Emma saw things that adults missed, Ethel Patterson observed during one of her frequent visits to the ranch. The former FBI agent had become the Foundation's unofficial historian, collecting stories and evidence about Thunder's 20-year mission to protect the community. Children and animals communicate on a level that grown-ups often lose. The discovery of Thunder's complete story had prompted other communities to re-examine their own histories of livestock behavior and accidents. Similar patterns emerged in agricultural regions across the country, suggesting that Clayton's methods were not unique. Thunder's heroism had exposed a national problem that law enforcement agencies were now actively investigating. 1 year after Thunder's death, Jake received a phone call that would add another layer to their understanding of the bull's extraordinary nature. A genetics laboratory in Colorado had completed DNA analysis of samples taken from Thunder's remains, revealing something that stunned everyone familiar with his story. Thunder was not just any Brahman bull. He was a direct descendant of champion bloodlines worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. His mother had been a prized breeding animal whose genetic value made her a target for theft rather than random violence. Clayton's murder of Thunder's mother 20 years earlier had been motivated by greed as much as by systematic elimination of threats to his land acquisition schemes. Thunder carried the genes of champions. Dr. Wheeler explained to Jake and Emma as they reviewed the laboratory results. His intelligence, his protective instincts, his extraordinary physical capabilities, all of it was enhanced by genetics that represented decades of careful breeding. The revelation added poignancy to Thunder's story, showing that he had inherited not just superior physical traits, but also the behavioral characteristics that made him such an effective guardian. His mother's murder had been intended to eliminate a valuable genetic line, but Thunder had survived to fulfill his hereditary purpose in ways that his killers never anticipated. Emma's response to learning about Thunder's championship bloodline was characteristically wise. "Thunder didn't save Daddy because he had special genes," she said matter-of-factly. "He saved Daddy because he loved us. Love is what made him special." The first anniversary of Thunder's death brought thousands of visitors to the Memorial Ranch. Families who had been saved by the evidence his sacrifice had uncovered came to pay their respects. Children who had been inspired by his story brought artwork and letters. Agricultural communities that had implemented new safety protocols based on Thunder's example sent delegations to honor his memory. Jake stood before the gathered crowd, his voice strong despite the emotion of the moment. "Thunder didn't set out to be a hero," he said. "He just loved his family and protected them the only way he knew how. In doing so, he taught us that heroism isn't about seeking glory. It's about doing what's right, regardless of the cost." The ceremony concluded with the release of a dozen white doves, each carrying a message of hope written by visiting children. As the birds soared over the Montana landscape, Emma placed a fresh bouquet of wildflowers at Thunder's statue. "Do you think Thunder knows how many people he helped?" she asked her father. Jake looked out over the crowd of families whose lives had been touched by Thunder's sacrifice, then at the rolling pastures where new calves played safely under their mother's watchful eyes. The ranch that had once faced destruction was now a thriving symbol of community resilience and the power of unconditional love. "I think Thunder always knew that love multiplies," Jake replied, echoing the wisdom that Thunder had taught them all. "When you give everything for others, that gift keeps growing and touching lives you never imagined." As the sun set over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples just as it had on the night Thunder died, the Morrison family gathered for their evening ritual. They stood together at Thunder's memorial, sharing stories and memories, while the gentle evening breeze carried the sound of contented cattle across the valley. Thunder's legacy lived on, not just in the lives he had saved or the laws that bore his name, but in the daily choices of people who had learned from his example. Love without condition, protection without reward, sacrifice without regret. These were the lessons of a bull who had shown humanity what heroism truly meant. Thunder's story reminds us that the greatest treasures in life aren't found in bank accounts or property deeds. They're discovered in the unwavering loyalty of those who love us unconditionally. In our fast-paced world, where relationships often feel transactional and temporary, Thunder showed us what pure devotion looks like. He didn't calculate the cost of saving Jake. He simply acted from a heart that knew no limits to love. This magnificent bull understood something many humans struggle with, that true wealth comes from the bonds we forge and the sacrifices we make for those we cherish. When Jake faced losing everything, his ranch, his legacy, his very life, it wasn't money or lawyers that saved him. It was the fierce love of a creature who valued Jake's life more than his own. Thunder's legacy lives on in every moment we choose love over fear, protection over self-preservation, and faith over doubt. His story proves that miracles aren't supernatural events. They're the natural result of love pushed to its absolute limits. In a world that often feels cold and disconnected, thunder reminds us that genuine love still exists, still matters, and still has the power to move mountains. What animal in your life showed you unconditional love that changed everything? Have you ever witnessed loyalty that restored your faith in the power of pure devotion? Share your story. We'd love to hear how love conquered impossible odds in your own life.